A lot to cover today, from politics to Missouri, but we do start with 2016 and the fourth Republican debate coming up tonight in Milwaukee. Only 8 candidates making the main event tonight, down from 10. Chris Christie, Mike Huckabee did not have the poll numbers. They will, however, be at the earlier undercard debate. One of the key storylines this evening, Jeb Bush versus Marco Rubio, mentor versus protege. The fireworks already started, however, with this New York Times story, and it quotes unnamed sources who say Bush's super PAC is planning a devastating new line of ads against Rubio. But the ink was barely dry on that story before Rubio's people debuted this video rebuttal. Take a look.
I'm a huge Marco fan.
He's probably the most articulate conservative on the scene today, and the fortitude to be a good president.
So proud of his high voltage energy. I'm so proud of his enthusiasm. I'm so proud of his eloquence.
I'm a huge Marco fan.
I'm Marco Rubio, and I approve of this message.
So we've got it all covered with our all-star team of political reporters. MSNBC's Casey Hunt following the Bush campaign. NBC's Hallie Jackson is on the trail with Donald Trump, and NBC's Chris Jansing is following the Carson campaign. Casey, I want to begin with you and Jeb Bush practicing with the debate coach. We knew about that, but is he going to be on the attack against Marco Rubio again, or has he decided that his approach is going to be more cautious?
Thomas, good afternoon. I think the latter is more likely. I think that we're going to see a Jeb Bush here who's going to try to focus on his record, his conservative record, and focus on policy proposals instead of trying to turn fire on Marco Rubio. I think you're going to see him try to contrast more with Hillary Clinton than with his former protege. They know that it didn't necessarily work out so well for them in the last debate, and Bush isn't necessarily comfortable being the person that's executing those attacks. I talked to him in my interview with him in New Hampshire last week about this, and he says he does believe people need to be vetted, but that he's not necessarily the one to do the vetting. And that New York Times story, in many ways, has played into the Marco Rubio's camp's hands. They feel as though, you know, there are a lot of Republicans out there who feel like while they might be supportive of Jeb Bush, they don't necessarily want to see him going out there and beating up on somebody who they view as a generational change, a new face in the party, somebody who brings diversity, somebody who they like a lot. So in many ways, that's been a challenge. But I would point out that this ad that is reportedly been created by this super PAC, it's focused on abortion, and the focus there is the general election. This is a message to donors saying Marco Rubio can't win a general election, and we're going to put money behind it to show that. I had one Republican source privately tell me today that Hillary is going to gut him like a fish. That was the quote from the Republican source about Marco Rubio. So that's where they're going behind the scenes with this, Thomas.
Meanwhile, you had an opportunity to speak with Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, and talk to him about the anticipation of tonight, especially as we watch the ebb and flow of the campaigns.
Reince Priebus, of course, they've been in a little bit of hot water over how the last debate went down. Obviously, the campaigns got together, had that meeting to try to change some of these rules. I think coming into this debate, though, the conversation's changed in so much as you have Huckabee and Christie not on the stage here. And Chris Christie, in particular, has seen a bounce in New Hampshire polls. He's had a strong couple of weeks. Obviously, you'll remember that viral video where he talked about drug addiction in a very moving way. He's creeping up in those early state polls. But right now, those early state polls aren't being included in the criteria for the debates here. So when I asked Chairman Priebus about it, he said that he does want to see more early state polling incorporated into the debate criteria down the line. Now, the RNC doesn't have official control over that. Ultimately, it is the network's decision, but that would be what Priebus would suggest in the future, Thomas.
Casey, thanks. Let's go to NBC's Hallie Jackson. She is following Donald Trump's campaign. And Hallie, what are you hearing about Trump's biggest target tonight? Is it going to be Ben Carson?
Potentially, yeah. I think you're going to see Trump maybe go after a lot of the folks on this stage, as he has been doing even just in the last 24 hours. We saw that tweet storm against Marco Rubio, who may be another target for Donald Trump. Ben Carson, obviously Trump has been talking about this for a while, and talking about Carson in the same breath that he says he likes Dr. Carson, that he's a nice guy. He's also picking up this line of questioning about Carson's anecdotes about his life story. So Trump capitalizing on that. You may also see Donald Trump go after, Jeb Bush, any number of candidates on stage, as has been his past practice. Two quick notes as we talk about the potential for Trump to go after Rubio, as we saw just even last night. The Rubio team, you talked about the new ad that's coming out from Rubio online this morning with Jeb Bush, as you played, saying, hey, I'm a big Marco Rubio fan. That's not something that was put together in the last 8 hours, right? They didn't come up with that as soon as that New York Times article was published. That is something that has been in the works for a little while. And while there may have been some tweaks and some finishing touches put on that, the campaign was ready to go, knowing that this attack was going to likely come. The other point on the abortion issue, that is something that might actually not be bad for Marco Rubio in the primary, given that he is trying to play to this very conservative GOP base. Talking about Trump, these may be lines of attacks, threads that Trump picks up on tonight. And here's what he had to say about Ben Carson, because I find this interesting. I want you to listen to it.
He's got a pathological temper or something, and he wrote that himself in the book. And, you know, I'm trying to figure out what's going on over here. You hit somebody in the face with a lock, you go after your mother with a hammer, you do all of these things, and you're trying to justify that, yes, you did them, and that's supposed to make you credible.
So why is Donald Trump going after Ben Carson? Look at the new poll, one of the new polls that's out today, this Marist poll, showing that Carson is at the top of the heap right along with Trump. Marco Rubio there in double digits as well. Ted Cruz coming in fourth place. That's the reason why Trump potentially feels threatened, Thomas. I spoke with an aide this morning who says Trump's looking forward to tonight's debate, as you might imagine.
I can imagine. Hallie, thank you very much. Let's go to our colleague, Chris Jansing. And Chris, you had the exclusive Saturday with Ben Carson, who was fighting back, saying that this was the most scrutiny any candidate has ever gotten about inaccuracies in his bio. So his surrogates, they've been spinning the wheels a little differently as we've been ramping up to this debate. Are you hearing from the campaign about how he's prepping for tonight in anticipation of being a main target?
Well, Thomas, they think this last week plus has been preparation for this debate. They think that this has been wildly unfair. You have heard it from Carson himself. And even though pundits and opponents don't necessarily agree, in fact, probably vehemently disagree that no one has ever been vetted as much as he has worked it to his advantage. And look, people go after him tonight to some sense at their peril, because the other thing that McClatchy poll shows is that he remains the most popular person in this race by far. And so that adds a sort of a level of confidence that they have. In addition, there have been a couple of stories out in recent days that they say back up what they have been saying about these articles that claim his personal history is not true. One of them from someone who went to Yale with him and said this hoax that he talked about is indeed something that happened there. And then in Parade magazine, his mother, who sadly now has Alzheimer's disease, telling Parade magazine almost 20 years ago that the incident where he supposedly attacked a relative with a knife and he didn't hurt him because it hit his belt buckle actually was true. So they are not only feeling as though they're ready for this, they're fundraising off of it and fundraising off of what they say unfair attacks by the media, Thomas.
Chris Jansing, Hallie Jackson, Casey Hunt, thank you all for that report. We're going to be talking a little later on throughout the show. We turn now to MSNBC host and political correspondent Steve Kornacki, who joins me with a breakdown for what the candidates need to do tonight. And Steve, it's different for each one for how they can advance and also stabilize.
Yeah, well, we've got 8 people on the stage for the 4th Republican debate, 8 people on the main stage. We thought what we would do is come up with a to-do list for some of the big names who are up there tonight and for one of the names who is not on that main stage. What is it going to take for them to have a successful night in this debate? So let's start with the man we've just been talking about these last few minutes, Ben Carson. We think the item, the number one item on his to-do list is to be ready to go deep. Here's what we mean by that. Obviously, he is going to be ready if any of these questions about his past come up, whether the moderators ask him about that, if they decide to go down that road, or if any of his fellow candidates decide to press those questions. We know he'll be ready for that, or at least they've been preparing for that. But here's the thing I think the Ben Carson people really need to be ready for, and that is the moderators of this debate. Don't forget, this is the Fox Business Channel. They have been promoting this as a debate that is going to focus on economic issues. That means Ben Carson has to be ready for some very detailed, probing, and specific questions about his economic plan, about taxes, about issues, about policy. The risk here for Ben Carson is that he shows up ready to talk about his past, ready to talk about the hammer and the knife and all these sorts of things, and then you start getting questions about tax brackets and economic policy. He has to be ready to go deep and show a command of policy that maybe he hasn't necessarily shown at all times during this campaign. How about the to-do list for Donald Trump? So you just played Donald Trump there going after Ben Carson. He's been doing this on the stump. He's been doing this in interviews. As Hallie was saying, there is a risk in this for Donald Trump. The risk in this is that Ben Carson's poll numbers among Republicans, not just how he's doing in terms of would you vote for this guy, but the question of do you like this guy? Ben Carson's personal popularity with Republican voters is astronomical. It is through the roof. And the risk for Donald Trump is you end up looking like a bully. You know, he went after Jeb Bush. It worked out well. He went after Rand Paul. It worked out well for him. Will it be different if he decides to go after Ben Carson face to face? Will he look like a bully in a way that hurts him? How about the to-do list for Jeb Bush? We say no apologies this time. This is very simple. The last debate, they all showed up. Everybody said Jeb Bush had the most he had to prove. He ended up after that debate having to call up his donors and apologize and say it wouldn't happen again. He's getting another chance tonight. How many more chances does Jeb Bush have if he does not show something new, something different, something fresh, something vigorous tonight? Let's see if he does that. How about Marco Rubio? We say keep hitting doubles. That has been basically his debate strategy all year. We've had 3 of these so far. He turns in very solid performances. You could certainly say in that exchange with Jeb Bush last time over his Senate votes, that was a home run moment. But generally, the story for Marco Rubio has been he stands out for having solid performances. You hit doubles. Eventually, people start to notice that batting average starts to get impressive. How about Ted Cruz? We say think before pouncing. What do we mean? We mean this. The #1 moment for Ted Cruz this campaign, arguably, was in the last debate when he went after the moderators. If you don't remember it, here it is. We can play it for you.
The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media. This is not a cage match. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain? Ben Carson, can you do math? John Kasich, will you insult 2 people over here? Marco Rubio, why don't you resign? Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen? How about talking about the substantive issues people care about?
Great response for Ted Cruz last debate, going after the moderators, going after the media. Obviously, the instinct tonight for him will be to find another moment to do that again, but he's got to be careful. As we say, this is the Fox Business Channel's debate. This is more of sort of the home team for the Republicans, for the right, for the conservatives. So to go after the moderators tonight is riskier for Ted Cruz potentially than it was to go after the last set of moderators. So we say Ted Cruz has got to think before pouncing and trying to create another one of those moments, Thomas.
It'll be one to watch, that's for sure. And as you point out, it'll be interesting to see if they stay on topic with the economy or come out with other things. We shall see. Steve, thank you, sir. Developing now. All right, so now we move on to 2016 and politics. We got a number of stories that we're covering for you at this hour. We start with Dr. Ben Carson under fire after a number of media organizations have been unable to corroborate personal anecdotes that Dr. Carson has told. Most written and publicized in a lot of his bestsellers, and these stories often occurred in Carson's youth. This weekend, Carson told NBC's Chris Jansing that no candidate ever has faced this level of scrutiny.
You don't think that Bill Clinton or the president with his birth certificate, people who still refuse to believe?
Not even close.
So what do you think is going on? Why you?
Because I'm a threat.
To
the progressive, the secular progressive movement in this country. I'm a very big threat.
A number of anecdotes are under the microscope. Here are 4 for you. That he stabbed a boy and led a violent life before religious transformation. That he protected white classmates during a riot after MLK was shot. That he met one of the top military commanders in the U.S., General William Westmoreland, and was offered a full scholarship to West Point. Also that he was called the most honest student by a Yale psychology professor after the professor tested his students' honesty with an elaborate hoax. Now today, 2 of his fellow candidates took issue with Carson, blaming the media.
We're all responsible for our own personal stories, Joe.
Yes.
All of us, whether it's Ben Carson or Marco Rubio, we're responsible for the personal stories we tell about our lives, and we need to be asked about them.
I think the most surprising thing is that, I'm not going to get into arguing what Ben did or didn't do, but the one thing I heard him say that I was kind of taken aback when he said that, people are looking into his personal life and they're going after him. I'm thinking, pal, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Joining me from Wisconsin is NBC's Hallie Jackson, and from Washington, Jeremy Peters of the New York Times. Hallie, let me start with you because I know you are in place in Milwaukee in anticipation of fight night number 4, the Republican debate tomorrow night. This one on economics.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of questions about the biography of Ben Carson, which is dominating the top headlines. Do we know if the Carson camp is prepared to deal with this issue that most likely will come up on that debate stage, whether a question is asked or one of the other candidates levels it?
That's exactly right, because no matter how you slice it, it looks to be a storyline heading into tomorrow night, Thomas. And I think what you'll see is what you've been seeing from Dr. Carson over these last 4 or 5 days, which is flipping this into an attack on the media, right? Ben Carson has said, hey, these questions are out of line. The media is getting this all wrong. He has used this strategy very effectively, raising millions of dollars off of this, tweeting out thanks biased media when he announced the fact that he had raised a bunch of money after these questions started coming up about the authenticity, about the veracity of some of these anecdotes involved in his life story. So it certainly is something that we wouldn't be surprised to see come up tomorrow night. As you rightly note, this has dominated the headlines for the last few days. So it's a matter of whether Carson can come out of tomorrow night, I don't want to say unscathed, Thomas, but in a way that makes him look stronger than he did before the debate.
Well, hopefully maybe a little more on offense than on defense about some of these questions. Jeremy, let me play something. A Carson campaign spokesperson told me in the last hour. Dina Bass was my guest, and it has to do with the controversy over whether Carson was offered a full scholarship to West Point. Take a listen.
He had the opportunity to meet with a number of people who quite frankly said to him that he would have no problem getting into West Point. And so the questions that are being raised right now about the use of the word scholarship versus the fact that once you actually are enrolled at West Point, you don't have to pay, those kinds of things are the level of scrutiny that we think is a little bit extreme.
So, Jeremy, these stories, are they really affecting the base of Dr. Carson's support, or is the bigger worry about how to grow that base of support if the foundation is shaky?
I think, Thomas, that this is an argument that Ben Carson is going to win. If it's Ben Carson versus the media in a Republican primary, I think the Republican candidate is usually going to come out on top of that. But, you know, this is what makes these stories so difficult, because when there's been some fine journalism done on this, some, I think, very appropriate scrutiny given to his record, but if you can't disprove him, that's very different from saying I couldn't find anybody to corroborate. And I think Ben Carson ultimately prevails if the question comes down to, well, you know, the media says that they couldn't find anybody. Well, that's not how voters are going to see it.
All right, so let's move on, and we will see how this all plays out tomorrow night. But one person that's going into this with maybe a little bit of wind to his back is Donald Trump. And Hallie, let me ask you, because Saturday Night Live, great ratings, a lot of tune-in, curiosity, neck and neck with Ben Carson now. Is there a feeling or an expectation that Donald Trump could go after Carson on the stage?
I mean, listen, Thomas, Donald Trump is a guy who knows how to throw a punch and he knows how to land one. And he's done something very interesting over these last couple of days. He has, while acknowledging that he believes Dr. Carson is a nice person, has still in the same breath managed to bring up a number of these issues and a number of these questions that Carson has answered to. So this is a political strategy that Trump has used. And I would be surprised if we did not see that on stage tomorrow night. Donald Trump takes shots. He says he's a counterpuncher, but oftentimes he's sort of counterpunching against the counterpunch that never came. So I think this is something you'll see from Trump. And, you know, to Jeremy's point, too, you talk about this idea that the strategy of attacking the media will likely work for Carson. Remember, though, he's getting support from the Republican Party. Reince Priebus this morning on the Today Show said that this is a crazy obsession, as he called it, that the media has with some of Carson's backstory, even while acknowledging that some questions are fair game. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out moving forward into tomorrow night here in Milwaukee.
Well, the only thing that Carson has, because there is no executive record, is his backstory. And that's
he's running.
What makes him...
His whole platform is this compelling life story and his biography and his book and how he has managed to come up through these difficult circumstances.
Jeremy, let's look at Marco Rubio. He's getting some scrutiny, continued scrutiny, over recently released billing statements from when he was in the legislature. Anything that is troubling for Rubio's campaign in those statements?
Well, as you just said, with these candidates who are running on biography, they are going to be scrutinized. And when the scrutiny starts to kind of chip away at this image they have presented of themselves, that can be problematic. Rubio, I don't think yet faces any type of huge revelation, the kind that has damaged Ben Carson, well, at least damaged Ben Carson in our eyes, I don't know, but in the eyes of conservative primary voters. But, you know, in these statements, what you see is somebody who mingled his personal and his professional finances. You see somebody who paid his bill late rather frequently. Are any of those going to make conservative primary voters say, I don't think Marco Rubio is qualified to be president? I doubt it. The bigger hits on Rubio, I think, are going to be the ones that go after his rationale for running, which is, I understand the plight of working people. I grew up paycheck to paycheck, right, and I'm fighting for you. So I think if other Republicans and Democrats can say that Marco Rubio is not on their side, that he's a career politician, that's going to be a lot more damning, and I think we should expect to see a lot of that come.
Well, and I know this, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can expect the Amex bill to be late. Jeremy Peters, thank you. Hallie Jackson, great to see you in Milwaukee ahead of the debate tomorrow night. Thank you. We turn now to breaking